law and the issues that patents can create is falling on deaf ears with the average user. I think the vast majority of users don't know what a patent is or its possible implications, and I think this is the uphill struggle that people have when they're trying to highlight the dangers and the harm to innovation that it can do. I mean, I've got nothing really much to add to that, apart from the other distraction that the general populace would have that would take their mind off the considering issues of patents is, especially in the UK, we've got rather larger economic problems to be worrying about, and I think the average desktop PC user at home or at work is not going to consider the implications or future implications of any sort of patent law. And I think it's a shame, but there's a lot of decent sites out there which do aim to educate people. But again, I think, like I said with Groklaw, I think Gordon agreed with me. It's a lot of them tend to expect a little bit of prior knowledge, and I think that puts a lot of people off. So there needs to be more education to the average user and to show how it is important, I think, and to show how it can affect their.
Yeah, my first experience with patents has been a very harmful thing, and I wrote some posts about it at the time, and I was writing mostly in my personal blog, which I still run occasionally. The situation with Palm, the makers of PDAs, Palm Pilot, and so on. Do you know about graffiti? Or should I explain what it is?
Yeah, explain it, Roy.
It's a very, very simple way of saying, well, how do we use a touchscreen to emulate or to interpret a person's handwriting? So one of the very obvious methods, it doesn't take a bright computer scientist to figure out. All you have to do is like take the directions of the writing, like, diagonals and directions, top to bottom, bottom to top, and try to put these things together and say, that looks like an A, that looks like a B, that looks like a C. And there is this language called graffiti. Now, graffiti what's something that resembles the notion of graffiti, of you trying to interpret strokes and turn the strokes into letters, or at least trying to interpret what the strokes are. There is a way of reading these things using one long touch or something, or actually having one stroke that's a circular thing or going up and then down, and then turn it into a letter. I think that Xerox had a patent on the fact that if you use one stroke to do that, that's their idea. You cannot do that. So Palm had to change all of their devices, at least future devices. I think they had to supposedly license the old devices to actually pay a fine for using the one-stroke thing. And they had to then cripple the experience and actually have two strokes for everything, okay? So you have to when you have to write these things down, and I'm very fast with these things. Actually, I struggle to do handwriting because I'm so used to graffiti. They had to now require people to do two strokes to do the same work, just to avoid a stupid patent from Xerox, and that's completely counterproductive. In fact, they didn't even pay Xerox. I don't know how much was demanded, but they just paid for something which was used before. And then went to something else. It's quite similar to what happened with TomTom, which is based in the Netherlands, when Microsoft tried to sue them over the file allocation table in their file system. And as far as I can tell, I think the amount of money that TomTom had to pay Microsoft was €500,000. And in future releases of the TomTom devices, they will not infringe the patent that Microsoft never really had go through the court. It was like some sort of a settlement or whatever. So here you have people making the products that they have, they make them worse. They not only lose money, but they actually make the products worse for the customers. And the customers will go, why did they change that? It used to be fine. And many people did say this in the Palm forums. And people say, well, that's because of a patent. So if patents are supposed to encourage innovation, what kind of innovation is this? What kind of improvement of things is this? And what happened recently, especially in mobile phone areas, you could have really exciting phones, but there's so many patents that you don't realize what kind of phones you could have now. Companies just don't make them because they're afraid of being sued. And in Independent, the British newspaper, you had a piece recently calling the whole patent extravaganza, calling it a bubble, because lots of companies value themselves based on the patents they have. They'll say, well, we don't have any assets in terms of property. We don't have assets in terms of we basically, our main asset is just investments from the outside, and the investments are being put into our monopoly, into our patent application or a piece of paper that says we own this algorithm, or we own this kind of idea, and we think we can make money out of that. And that's a bubble. So of course, when the patent turns out to be useless, or you don't make anything out of it, you go bankrupt. And that's just a bubble of invisible so-called property, or whatever you want to call that.
Well, if we'll shift on from the patent discussion for a moment with a few bits of quick news.
I just want to have one small thing to add.
Go for it, Roy.
Because we mentioned Nokia being part of the push now for Europe to have the opening for software patents, and this, by the way, is a reason to not buy from Nokia now. If you don't like software patents, don't make Nokia stronger. One of the things I should point out in the UK, the reason we have a sort of a validation of software patents is because what used to be Symbian, now Symbian is fully owned by Nokia, which is going to dismantle Symbian anyway. The Symbian operating system had this kind of a trick that they did something with DLL. I think it's dynamic libraries linking, something like that. It's a kind of a Windows-like mechanism for keeping track of libraries and actually calling functions and being able to go into a binary and execute things. Anyway, Nokia had a patent on it, and it was validated in the UK court. And this was said to be the first case in the UK where a software patent was validated inside the UK by a courtroom. And this is why we believe that there is some precedence now, only in the UK and in Germany, for software patents. This is one of the reasons, if we do have a union, kind of a unified system in Europe, they might adopt the standards of Germany and the UK and actually accept software patents as a whole in the whole of Europe, all in one fell swoop. So that's about it.
Well, we'll move on to a few shorter bits of news, and hopefully you might have a bit of a longer topic for us after that. We've got the news that Ubuntu 8.04 is reaching the end of its life now, its support life. The reason I mention Ubuntu 8.04, it's probably, for most people, is just another Linux distribution and an old version that's an old release of Ubuntu. But for me, it was quite important. I was, up until Ubuntu 8.04, I was dual booting, and it was Ubuntu 8.04 that convinced me to go 100% Linux in the home. At that stage, I believe, for me, it was working 100% out of the box. Everything that I wanted to do could be done. I had no little teething issues that I had previously with other Linux distributions. So I bring it up on my site, and I have a special place in my heart for Ubuntu, the Hardy Heron, because, like I say, it was the distro that convinced me to move to Linux in the home 100%. I don't know if you had any experience with Ubuntu?
Yeah. Okay, so the main story with Ubuntu. The first time I used the release was in 2005. But this was the first release of Ubuntu, because of course the first release of Ubuntu was in October 2004. And until that point, I was mostly using Red Hat and then Fedora, and I used some SUSE until the deal with, obviously, Novell deal with Microsoft. My experience with Ubuntu was mainly the first few releases. I still have several CDs of 5.04, which was the second release, and actually I have almost all of them. But the time period you talk about, April 2008, I'm not sure why. Yeah, I started to move more towards Mandriva, and I used that for a while. The reason I then came back to Ubuntu, after, having used the first releases and spent some time even advocating it to an extent, was a person recommended to me that I use Kubuntu, and I was reasonably happy. I was using an alpha version for like half a year. And that's how good it was. It was really quite polished, and I didn't really mind the fact it was alpha. And I still have one machine running Ubuntu. I have the other ones running Fedora. But Fedora is, and I said some people get insulted when I say, well, Fedora still gives me a harder time sometimes than Ubuntu, even though I try to like Fedora sometimes a bit more, because I think it's I think lots of people in my position, they don't really want to be associated with Ubuntu because it kind of describes them as not being aware of. But the fact is, with Fedora, I sometimes have some slight issues, but not always the fault of Fedora itself. And I think the community which grew around Ubuntu led to a situation where the packages are built to work a bit better with Ubuntu, or at least tested better on Ubuntu. This puts a lot of pressure on some of the competitions that they had, including Mandriva. And this is one of the reasons I wasn't using Mandriva quite as much anymore.
Well, I mean,